Picture this. September 25th, 1978. The sky over San Diego, California is just a perfect, cloudless blue. Absolutely ideal flying weather. But on this stunning morning, a totally routine passenger flight was about to become an unthinkable tragedy. And that's the central question here, isn't it? You've got a modern jet, a crew with tons of experience, and perfect weather. So how on earth did things go so horribly wrong just minutes before they were supposed to land? That right there, that was the absolutely bone-chilling final radio call from Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 182. It was a desperate, last-second cry that marked the terrifying end of a catastrophic chain of events. What's so wild is that just seconds before that call, everything on the flight deck seemed completely normal. The crew was just going through their checklists, getting ready to land at San Diego International Airport. It was just another day at the office. Then, out of nowhere, the plane's right wing just dropped like a stone. The nose pitched down hard, and that massive Boeing 727 started plunging towards the houses in the North Park neighborhood below. The pilots barely had seconds to even process what was happening, but the jet was already completely out of their control. Okay, so to really understand how this could have happened, we need to rewind the clock just a few minutes, because PSA 182 wasn't the only plane up in that clear blue sky. There was another aircraft flying nearby, on a path that would unknowingly lead straight to disaster. So you had two very different planes sharing the same bit of sky. On one hand, you've got this huge commercial jetliner with 135 people on board, and on the other, a tiny little Cessna 172. It's a training plane with an instructor and a student pilot who is actually practicing flying with his view blocked by a hood. Two totally different aircraft on two totally different missions. And get this, look at the experience level in that PSA cockpit. We are talking about tens of thousands of flight hours combined. These guys were not rookies by any stretch of the imagination. They were seasoned pros, which honestly just makes what happened next even more puzzling. So, the big question is how these two planes ended up on a collision course. Well, it all started with a really standard, everyday instruction from air traffic control. An instruction that, unfortunately, set off a whole cascade of misperceptions and ultimately, one deadly mistake. All right, so here's how that chain of errors started. Air traffic control tells the PSA crew, hey, there's a small Cessna out there, keep an eye on it. The PSA crew says, roger that, got him in sight. But then they lost sight of it against the visual clutter of the city below. And the critical mistake? They never told ATC they lost it. Instead, they just assumed. This is the phrase from the cockpit voice recorder that changes everything. I think. It wasn't a confirmation, it wasn't a fact, it was an assumption. They assumed that the little Cessna was behind them and no longer a factor. But they were tragically wrong. The Cessna was still right there, just below them, hidden in a blind spot. And here's where it gets even more heartbreaking. There was actually a technological safety net. A conflict alert system on the air traffic controller's radar screen started blaring, warning them of a potential collision. But that system had a history of false alarms in that busy airspace, so it was kind of seen as a nuisance. And this crucial warning, was ignored. So now you've got the PSA crew thinking the Cessna is out of the way, and you've got air traffic control thinking the PSA crew has the Cessna in sight. And with nobody realizing the danger, the two planes just kept flying right towards each other. At 9:01 in the morning, the right wing of the 727 just sliced right through that small Cessna, completely destroying it in an instant. The impact tore a massive hole in the 727's wing, wrecking its flight controls and ripping open the fuel tank. The airliner immediately snapped into a violent right roll and began that final, uncontrollable dive. The human cost was just staggering. Every single one of the 135 people on board the PSA jetliner died, as did the two pilots in the Cessna. But the tragedy didn't stop in the air. The wreckage slammed into the North Park neighborhood, killing 7 more people on the ground. When you add it all up, 144 people lost their lives that day. It remains the deadliest aviation disaster in California's history. So, after a horror like this, the single most important question everyone asks is, how do we make sure this never, ever happens again? The investigation that followed would go on to change aviation safety forever. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, put the primary blame squarely on the PSA flight crew. They failed to follow a fundamental rule of flying. If you're told to keep another plane in sight and you lose it,
You have to tell air traffic control immediately. They also noted that ATC procedures contributed to the accident. One of the very first changes was the creation of what's called a terminal radar service area over San Diego. Basically, this made it mandatory for air traffic controllers to use radar to keep all planes actively separated, big and small. It added a crucial layer of safety that just wasn't there before. And maybe the single biggest legacy of Flight 182 is TCAS. Think of it as an electronic set of eyes in the cockpit. The system automatically detects other planes, and if there's a risk of collision, it tells the pilots exactly what to do: climb, descend. This tragedy was a huge reason why TCAS became mandatory on every airliner. But as this quote from the investigation reminds us, tech is only one part of the puzzle. At the end of the day, safety still comes down to people. It's about proper training, sticking to the procedures, and building a culture that just refuses to let assumptions or complacency creep in. The story of PSA Flight 182 is such a powerful lesson, one that was tragically written across a clear blue sky. It's a stark reminder that even as technology makes flying safer and safer, the human element is still the most critical part of the system, and sometimes the most fragile. It really leaves you with one big question: can technology ever truly protect us from ourselves? Thanks for joining me.